Hey everyone, it's Andrew. This is going to be a book review, or general impressions about the book called The Trial by Franz Kafka. There are a lot of reviews out there already in Synopsis and things like that about this book, but I just want to do a general video about my overall impressions after just reading this book. I finished it last night, and I just want to do a video kind of discussing my general thoughts. Just kind of like a preliminary thing is like, I'm not a Kafka-esque expert. I haven't read any other books by him, and I don't really know the history of them and things like that. So those of you that are looking for like strong literary critique and things like that, you'll have to look at other videos, but this is just my general impression of it. So just a quick synopsis without spoiling it too much. The book, The Trial by Franz Kafka, it was written in 1914. Franz actually passed away before completing it, so it was published posthumously in 1925 later on when he died, or after he died. The story in general, it's about a Joseph K, K likely standing for Kafka, so kind of an autobiography in essence, I suspect. And it goes, he's a chief financial officer at a local bank, and one day he lives in a boarding house. There are some police officers that are kind of just dressed out of uniform, and they come and kind of arrest him. There's an inspector that comes and puts him on trial at that time, and essentially says, you're arrested, but you can go about your daily life, and you are currently on trial for being guilty of something. Immediately, like the K kind of starts, not immediately, but he starts panicking in the aspect of being on trial and being guilty for something, because he's inherently innocent and doesn't have anything in his record that would be unlawful or anything like that, which would automatically make you think he should be arrested. But they kind of don't send him to jail. They kind of send him about his regular daily life, back to work and things like that. And he has to adjust to this life where he's living with knowing about this trial and being supposedly guilty of something and the consequences of that without fully knowing what he's guilty for. And he's never really told what he's guilty for, so it's very upsetting to him. And so the whole book really resonates on that topic. For my impressions, in general, when I was reading this book, it was weird because it was it was confusing to a certain extent because it never really answered itself in its own right. But the book, as I was reading it, really gave me a feeling of angst and anxiety related to it. You could feel it in my tone and like my emotional tone reading the book, because I was resonating with the character in this, or kind of empathizing with the character in this book. And so I think that's kind of the main highlight of the book, at least the first time you read it, is that in the book, as you're reading it, it's going over Kay's experience of being put on trial and having to deal with the anxiety of having that guilt over him, and kind of navigating the, I guess, legal system that exists to try to figure out how he can be acquitted of being guilty and not having the consequences of it. Additionally, because he's in the situation where he's not like put in jail or anything, he has to still go about his life, which is extremely anxiety provoking, because at any time, essentially, they can kind of pull him forth and kind of put the accusations upon him. So that's my general sense. And kind of initial things, like overall the summary, like moving forwards in the book, is like he gets arrested as far as that aspect, and put on trial. And then so he, through the series of the book, he goes back to work, and he's got the people there that find out that he's on trial, and then he has an uncle that finds out he's on trial, and people are finding out throughout the book within the community that he's on trial, and they kind of say you're like guilty or assume he's guilty just because he's on trial, and they to ask him about the trial, but there's nothing really going on. Nothing changes as far as being put into the court or anything like that. He's got one time where he's got this hearing in like this kind of shady attic type of space with these weird people that kind of like just cheer and not cheer to just see a reaction out of him. But that's the only time he's really put in like a formal trial with judges, but nothing comes of it. It just kind of ends. So he continues to go about, and people are talking to him about the trial. So the uncle essentially brings up the fact that, like, I know this lawyer that might be able to help you out. So he goes to the lawyer, and like the lawyer, like he gets connected with the lawyer, but then it's like sidetracked, and there's this nurse that's helping the lawyer because he's sick, and he ends up being like not seduced, but she and him are like seduced, and they kiss and stuff, and they develop like a romantic attraction there, and that's just like is just random offshoot there. And then later on, he's in the bank, and like this guy that's just like looking for a loan for business purposes, but mentions that he knows this painter that is connected through his like painting to the judicial system. So he goes and like talks to that guy, and that guy essentially says like you have 3 different ways of navigating the trial, and one is essentially being a full acquittal, where you don't act guilty, you don't try to get help, and you're just innocent, and your case is completely wiped off the books. But he's never heard of that ever happening, and his family, because he's a painter for the courts, and he paints like the judges and stuff, and his dad was that, and his dad never heard of that ever happening, and he never heard of that happening. So a full acquittal is like impossible to happen. The second is like this presumed, I think it was like, I don't remember the formal term, but it was like a presumed acquittal, where essentially like the case through like a lawyer is like put on hold, where it's like acquitted, but then later on he comes, like the case might come back at any time. So you go about your daily life, but then at any moment, then like some other judge might look at the case file because it still exists and say, oh, we need to arrest this guy. So at any moment in your life, you can get arrested. So you'll be like normal and full, like you'll go about your normal day, and then all of a sudden you'll get arrested again. And then the other one was, I don't remember the term, but it was like not purgatory or something, but it was like pushed back, where like you basically keep it at like the minor level of the court system, where your case is always ongoing, where you check in with the judges, you have a lawyer, but they keep it at this low level where it never gets enough attention to be acted upon or judged upon entirely, and so you keep that on forever, but you're consistently dealing with this on a regular basis. So it goes over that topic at that time, and he's just navigating this, and like the whole book, as he's going throughout it, Kay essentially goes from this full thought of innocence, where in the beginning he's like, I'm innocent, whatever, it doesn't matter because I'm not guilty and things like that, and he doesn't even really recognize the trial, to as people continue to talk about it and ask about it, he feels more like he has to address the issue because there's going to be consequences eventually of it, and he's trying to figure out why. And near the end of the book, he ultimately determines that he kind of buys in that he's guilty no matter what, just based on what he's done, like living his life, just based on the fact that they're putting him on trial and things like that. So in general, like that's an overall summary of the book. I mean, there's other people that have done analyses of it, but that's like my general impression. At one point, he goes to this cathedral, so he's at work and he's with the vice president and president of the bank. And this Italian guy comes in who's told to like show like around town for a 2-day period, and so he's getting all set up for that. And they recommend him to go to like show him around town. But the Italian, when he comes in, is essentially like, just go to the cathedral and we'll meet there, and that's the only thing I want to see because I'm busy. And so he goes to the cathedral, starts walking around, prepares for like showing art at that place, and kind of jots down all these notes for like an Italian to talk to the Italian guy because he's got a poor accent. But when he gets there, the Italian guy never shows up. And he's walking around the cathedral, just kind of looking around, looks at some of the art, and then there's this like a priest that shows up. And the priest, I guess, is the chaplain of the jail, and he brings up this topic of like guilt and things like that, and he gives this philosophical story that many of you probably heard about, like a doorkeeper at the gates or doors of law. And so this guy comes up there one day and he's like, I want to gain entry to law, and the doorkeeper there who is like, no, you can't come in now. So the person that's trying to gain access like essentially sits on a stool his entire life waiting for access, gives gifts to the doorkeeper, tries to get in, and never eventually gets in. So he reaches his deathbed, and finally the doorkeeper shuts the door. So he sees all that's happening in the gates of law or whatever the area, and it goes into this like whole philosophical offshoot that I don't want to get into too much detail, but it's really kind of determining whether like the doorkeeper was like untrue to that person and things like that. But like that's the whole conversation in the cathedral, and that gives this little offshoot and thinking about that. Which it was interesting, and I'd have to go back and read it in more detail. But that was like one thing, and that was like right before the end of the book, and I'm not going to get the ending of the book because it ends pretty abruptly. But in general, my impression of this book is I don't really know what the heck happened in it. Like it's rather confusing and weird. Not in the sense of like when I read, for instance, James Joyce, like a portrait of an artist as a young man. When I read that book, I didn't know what the heck was going on, just because like James Joyce is really trying to make you think, and it's very like an intellectual novel as far as when you read it. I didn't feel that type of confusion, like like having gaps where I'm like, what the heck is going on? But this book was confusing as far as like I don't understand the overall message of it when I'm walking away and finishing reading it. Which is interesting, because the majority of the books I read, like this type of thing, I'm coming away with, and I'm like, oh, I understand the lesson, I understand that. But this book, I think I have to think about it more and like contemplate about it more, and maybe read other of Kafka's works to understand it a little bit more, just based on his backstory. Because my understanding was Kafka lived like around the time period at the turn of the century, where it was like 1910, 1914, in the time period of like totalitarian regimes in Europe and things like that. So he lived in a very dismal circumstance in like a very depressing lifestyle at that time. And that's what you kind of see in this book, is like a lot of this resonates with probably how Kafka lived his life. And so he probably felt trapped in the situation. So that's the connection. So I think if I understood Kafka's life more, then I could understand this book more and understand the grasp of it. But like if you look at other reviews and things like that online, a lot of it focuses on like it's this depressing satirical world of like this like bureaucraticness and totalitarian nature of just like suppression from like having to jump through hoops and having control from like people above you, so you feel trapped in your lifestyle. And that's the general thought process I got with this book in first. But then other people say it's rather humorous, and so it's dark humor, which I could see. So after I completed it, if I like read up on those reviews and things like that, I can see that interpretation. So I think at least the first time I've read this, I took a general sense of angst, anxiety, and kind of like empathy for the main character Kay in the book, in the fact that he felt trapped and being constantly like guilty for something that he never knew about, and then trying to navigate that circumstance. He's trying to figure out how to get innocent or acquitted of this, but every single way he goes, everybody's pointing in the direction of ways that you act in a guilty manner to cover up what you're doing, and kind of like get buddy with the judges or something, things like that, to like get acquitted. But he doesn't really, at least you get the sense that he doesn't want to do that because he's innocent, and the second he does that, he's going to be guilty. And so he's playing that with that kind of thought process in his mind. So it was a very like depressing, anxiety provoking book. I understand it like from that aspect. But I think that if I ever came back and read this again, I'd probably understand a lot more of like the background of it, and I would probably get a lot more nuances of what the story's saying as you're reading it, if you've read, like you already read it once. So I might come back at some point and read this again, not immediately. I don't tend to do that, but this is a book I might come back and read again at a different time, just to get another understanding of what exactly is going on in it, so that I can get a better like lesson or story out of it. But it's definitely interesting. It's definitely a very different read. Of note also, the reason why I think it's so anxiety provoking is Kafka, when he writes, this is a good example, is if you see, he'll have entire pages where there's no paragraph breakage at all. So it just kind of goes on and on. So like right here, there's pages where literally there's no paragraph break. So it just literally reads in like one continuous frame. And so I think even the style of how it writes kind of makes this angst or anxiety, because you don't have the sentence structure or the paragraph structure to break it up a little bit more and separate the story as it's going. So it feels like this like prolonged prose that kind of creates angst, at least when I was reading it. And that's an interesting thing that I haven't seen in other books. There are paragraphs here and there, but it's very, very like different. Additionally, like with all his like quotations and things like that, when they're actually conversing, he never structures that out. It's all kind of built in, and it's immediate, like back to back. So like the conversations between two characters is like he'll give like the sentence structure of one, and then immediately the sentence structure of the other, and back and forth. But it's not like separated as you usually see in other books. So that might create a little angst as you're reading it too. But in general, that's my overall impressions. I know that's not a great review or anything about this book, but that was my impressions of the book, and I want to just get it out there. If you have questions or anything or little insights, I'd be happy to kind of see that. Tons of people have read this book and have different interpretations, and there's a ton of analysis on it, so I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'm just kind of giving my two thoughts after reading it. So commenting, post anything below. I'd be happy to kind of talk with you about it further. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.